Hey everyone, this is Jack Mangan, and this is another S.L.A.M. Summit for Support Life and Music. Our guest today is Stephen Rosen, a legendary journalist who is best friends for many, many years with Eddie Van Halen. He's written the book Tonechaser, chronicling his relationship with Eddie. And so in this episode, of course, we'll discuss his relationship with EVH, band dynamics, Van Halen, drugs, cigarettes, playing sober, and near the end, we'll run through an amazing list of the names who Stephen met and interviewed during his career. Nobody rules these streets at night but me. What's up, everyone? It's Jack Mangan. You know me from Metal Hall of Fame, metalasylum.net, the Am I Evil graphic novel, and of course, Support Life and Music, which is working to fighting back against musician suicide, self-destruction, substance abuse, trying to save some lives and change the culture a little bit. We are really privileged today to be talking to someone who's really seen it all, has written about it all. He's been there for so much, and he's written a really amazing book, which I have to lean off camera. Hang on. Ugh. I need a forklift, Steve. My gosh. Tonechaser. It's about a little guy named Eddie Van Halen, or not a little guy, a giant, a mammoth, if you will, named Eddie Van Halen. So, Stephen Rosen, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to me today.
Very happy to be here, Jack.
Yeah, well, congratulations on this book. Like I said, it is just huge, and it's really a gorgeous book. Lots of great photos and so many stories. I think now, of course, I know you want people to read the book to really get the full narrative. So, there won't be any spoilers or anything like that. But tell people about, I don't know, give us your elevator speech. Tell people about, why you wrote it, what it's about, and what Van Halen fans are going to get out of it.
Those are big questions. Why I wrote it. So I meet Edward Van Halen in 1977. It's July 77. Cheap Trick is recording a live record at the Whiskey. I'm there with my brother to see Cheap Trick record this live record. I'm thinking Cheap Trick recording a live record at the Whiskey. This is going to be cool. And to make sort of a long story short, my very good friend Michelle Meyer, who booked the Whiskey, said, "Listen, there's somebody I would like you to meet." So we go upstairs to the Whiskey dressing rooms, and standing there in the corner is this guy Edward Van Halen. And we're introduced, and we just start talking about music and guitars and Clapton and Jeff Beck, and I don't know, man. I hate to sound like woo, but it was just something there. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was. I took 580 pages trying to answer that question. So we had this friendship relationship that lasted until 2003. In 2003, the relationship ends. And again, I don't want to give the book away because I think it's interesting if you can read what happened. But what started off so beautifully ended sort of kind of sadly. So 17 years goes by. It's 2000, and friends come to me and say, "Hey, man, you should write a book. You should write a book about hanging out with Edward Van Halen." And I go, "Well, I don't know. It's been 17 years. How much do I remember?" Getting back to your initial question, Jeff, why am I writing the book? And I thought about that question. And at a point in time, I honestly came to a realization that, look, man, I was lucky. I met this guy who would, essentially change the world of guitar playing for everybody. I got to see it up close. We were friends, and we cared about each other. And I thought, I think fans would love to hear about this guy, about this other side of this Edward Van Halen, not this, larger than life Eddie Van Halen guy up on stage. And so I sat down and wrote this book, and it was not easy to do. Again, I had to go back so many years in my memory. I mean, it was 17 years since we last spoke to each other, but some of these moments go back to 1977 and 78. So that's like I can't do the math in my head. Was that 47, 48 years previously? And, you know, so I'm trying to put all this together, and I wanted to write an honest book. And in telling this honest story, yes, there were moments that weren't amazing and they were kind of dark, you know, but I thought all of that has to be in there to truly flesh out this human being, this Edward Van Halen. And you know, it took me 14 months. It's funny when I say that, you know, people respond, goes, "Oh, that was pretty quick," and in my mind, it's like, "Wow," you know, it's a compliment that they're saying that. I understand why they're saying it. For me, I'd written 7 books previously. I wrote a book on Jeff Beck, wrote a book on Free and Bad Company, wrote a book on Ozzy, a book on Randy Rhoads. I think the longest any of those books ever took was like 4 months. So I say 14 months, and I'm thinking people are going to go, "Oh my God, I didn't think," you know. But so the book, I finished the book, you know, and I'm thinking, you know, did I capture what I wanted to capture? You know, was I able to reveal who this person was? Was I able to, you know, take a deep dive into the friendship and explain all that? And I didn't know. I really didn't know. And it was a pretty honest book. You know, it's the only kind of book that I could have written. You know, there was a point in time when I thought, well, you know what, man? I can just sit down and sort of kind of go through like a quick reprinting of all the interviews I've done with him, and that would have made an interesting book. But I thought, no, I can't do that. You know, that's not what this is. So yeah, at the end of the day, I took a lot of care in writing what was the best book I could possibly write. I think it's the best writing I've ever done. And Tonechaser was born, and the response to it has been pretty overwhelming. I mean, I think people really connected with it, and they can understand my feelings about Edward and his about me, and I think they understand this Edward Van Halen character a little bit more. So I couldn't be really happier with the way it turned out and the reactions to it. So yeah.
Well, yeah, that's great. Yeah, no, you and I, well, actually, just for everyone watching, Stephen and I met at the Metal Hall of Fame gala in January, so we chatted a little bit. Now, I remember we chatted a little bit about, at that time, the Alex Van Halen book, and he came out with a book last year as well. And then just in full disclosure for you and for everyone, I have not gotten to the book yet. I know of it. I've heard, you know, reviews. I'm aware of some of the things about it people have said, but I don't know if, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. I don't know if you've read it or if you've heard any, I don't know, anything about that book. And it's like, could they almost be companions for Van Halen fans?
Answering your last question first. Look, I think hardcore Van Halen fans will probably have Tonechaser and Brothers, Alex's book. Are they companion books? I don't think so. You know, somebody else might think so. I have read the book. I was blown away that Alex actually name checks me 3 times in the book, and he excerpts about 10 of my interviews with Edward that showed up in Tonechaser. So I was really pretty blown away by that. And again, don't want to give away Tonechaser, sort of a capsule little memory here. I met Alex and we got along great. I mean, you know, I mean, he kind of knew I was Edward's friend, and when I was up at 5150, Alex would be there a lot of times, and you know, we'd say hello, and he was comfortable me being around his younger brother. And there was no mistaking that Alex Van Halen was the bigger brother and sort of the, you know, his bodyguard, not physically, but he really looked out for Edward, and you could sense that. And I think if he sensed anything in me that was menacing or going to be hurtful to Edward, I think that, you know, he would have said something to Edward. You know, he wouldn't have, you know, wouldn't have allowed me into that inner circle. So that being said, some things happened down the line, to my mind, that were so innocuous as to be non-existent. For some reason, Alex took them to heart. And I'll just say real quickly what they were. In 95, I interviewed Edward. Our relationship by 95 had sort of changed, and not for the better. So I'm up at 5150 to do an interview with Edward. This is an interview that was set up by Warner's. That was right around the time of the Van Halen 3 record, and they were doing press. Typically, I would call Edward up and say, Edward, man, we need to do an interview for Guitar World, or a UK magazine needs an interview. You know, let's do something. You know, I'd call him personally. I never went through management or the label. So again, the relationship by 95 has sort of fallen apart a little bit. I was invited to come up to 5150 by Warner Brothers, and I wasn't even going to go. It's like, you know, I didn't even want to go. I went. So I see Edward, and I don't want to give that away, so I'm going to leave that alone. But Alex is there, and he was cool. You know, and we're in a room, and I'm talking with Edward. That's when they were going to go to Europe and open for Bon Jovi, because, you know, over here they were huge. In Europe, I mean, they did well, but nothing like Bon Jovi. You know, they weren't huge in Europe. So they, you know, go open for Bon Jovi, and he made a couple comments to me like, oh well, you know, Bon Jovi thinks, you know, we're going out with them so we can be legitimized, but we're legitimizing them, and they're just a hair band. And it was like, yeah, great, man. You know, that's honest. And I ended up printing that. To make a long story short, Alex heard about that, and I'm not sure where, because it was for a German magazine, and I don't even know where he would have got a hold of the German magazine or had it translated. And Edward told me this. He goes, man, Alex is so angry with you. I don't know if we can cuss here, Jack.
Yeah. All right.
He's so fucking mad at you, man, for writing that. I go, I'm sorry, I didn't even know. He goes, well, man, you know, he thought you were a friend. Why would you print that? At that point, so again, I've known Edward since '77. He has told me so many things, so many personal things that I have never ever divulged until I started writing the book. But all that goes out the window, because I wrote these couple of comments of Alex telling me that, you know, oh, Bon Jovi's just a bunch of posers. I thought it was so innocuous it meant nothing. Anyway, in getting back to your original question, Jack, so when I first heard that Alex had wrote a book, my thoughts were, oh my God, he is going to trash me and trash Tonechaser. So when I read that he, you know, went sort of the opposite, said, yeah, you know, Steve Rosen, these quotes, he never mentioned the title of the book, but he did mention, yeah, Steve Rosen interviewed Edward. I thought the book, it was good. It was short. For, you know, you're talking about this history. I mean, it took me 580 pages to cover, you know, 77 to 2003. I mean, you know, he had from 73 to 2020. I mean, you know, none of the Sammy era stuff is mentioned. Obviously, the Gary Sharon is not. I just felt it could have gone deeper in sort of explaining their relationship, you know, what it was like when they were kids. Those are my feelings. I mean, I've read reviews, and you know, a lot of fans loved it. A lot of fans, I think, had the same reaction I did. And the other thought that I had, I'll be quite honest with you, when I heard that Alex Van Halen was coming out with a book, I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm never going to sell another book again. I mean, who's going to buy my book when they can buy Alex Van Halen's book, his brother, you know? But that wasn't the case, you know. They were really entirely different books. I mean, it's a wholly different relationship, family and friendship, you know. And a lot of times you can tell friends things you can't tell your family. I'm not saying that was the case, but they were entirely different books. So no, I don't think they ever could have been companion books. But I think it's great that Alex did it. And I know that, you know, he was devastated by his brother's passing, which I can completely understand. And for him to, you know, to write the book, I think healed him some, you know. At least those are my feelings.
Yeah, well, yeah, I got to get around to reading. I've heard about the emissions in the book and all that stuff, but it's still if it shines a light and gives fans a little bit more info, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So something you touch on a lot in Tonechaser, and you just touched on a lot now, a little bit, is that I know how tight knit Eddie Van Halen was with the people around him. He was definitely not an island. I know he's very much of an individualist, but also very tight with Alex and Valerie and Wolfgang, and even I understand, from your book and just from what I've read over the years, even there's, a lot of love-hate stuff with the other guys in Van Halen over the years, Sammy and Dave and the bass player, whatever his name was. I'm just kidding. But yeah, so talk to me a little, have you, so what I'm getting at, and sorry for the roundabout way of getting there, have
Hmm.
you had any response or reaction, secondhand or direct, from anyone in the Van Halen camp to Tonechaser?
I have not.
Mm.
And, honestly, one of my great hopes and one of my dreams is one day to connect with Wolf. You know, um, uh, I'm trying to think. Well, does Wolf know about my book? And I'm thinking he probably does. I mean, he's out there. He's maybe seen, posts or something. So he's probably aware of it. I guess I look at it this way. Um, or maybe he's heard the book and maybe he's read a couple pages and thinks this is the worst piece of shit I've ever read. Hey, fair enough. you know but what I really thought was uh, the fact that I knew his father obviously before he knew his father or was aware of who his father was, right? And I knew Edward in those very early days of the band. And I guess I don't know. I would have thought, well, hey, this Steve Rosen guy, he knew my dad, during those early years, and he wrote a book and this and that, and you know, maybe he could tell me about my dad. Maybe he could tell me some stuff. I don't know. Those are my thoughts. I mean, has Al told him all those stories? Maybe. Did Valerie? Maybe. That's sort of how I looked at it. But in answer to your question, Jack, no, I've never heard from any of them. Um, you know, I would love to. Part of me, before I even started the book, um, and let me back up again. So I started the book in 2020, finished it in 2021. Um, uh, uh, 6 weeks after I began the book, Edward passed away. So one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to reach out to him before I even began the book. And by then we're talking again 2020. I hadn't spoken to him in 17 years, but still that respect I had from him never went away. And I thought, I want you to at least tell him I'm going to write this book. And I'll be honest, if he had said, don't write the book, I wouldn't have written the book.
Mm.
So, but the point being, can't remember what my point was.
Well, we were talking about just, yeah, any reactions or any connections to, I guess I'll expand the question since you've given me the opening, Steve, so I'm going to jump in.
Yeah, yeah.
Any connections with anyone in the camp really in the last 17 years, or was that pretty much when you and Edward went parted ways? Was that kind of it for your connection to the Van Halen camp?
That was the end of it.
Yeah.
And I again, I don't want to give anything about specifically away about the book. Edward changed, and I'm not the only one to recognize that. And I noticed a change in him, honestly. And again, I write about it in Tonechaser. Probably by the early '90s, and certainly by the mid '90s, it was really prevalent. Um, and again, I tried to understand or find reasons why he was changing, and it's this intangible thing. I think maybe it was a combination of elements. Maybe the situation with Warner's, with the label, with the band. Um, with his marriage, the drugs and the drinking and all of that, So yeah, by 2003, it ended. And we all know that, it was right around then we see those horrible, horrible photos of him. He's got his hair up in that samurai bun, and he's worn the jeans with the knees torn out, and the string belt, and the shoes without shoelaces. His teeth look like they're gone. I mean, he was bad. It was bad. I mean, he went off the deep end. Again, I wasn't there. I didn't see it, but I've read a lot of stuff about that point in time. And he was bad. So, our relationship ends in 2003, I think that was kind of a precursor. I'm not saying that because our relationship ended, this happened to him, but I'm saying, it was part of him changing,
Sure.
And it was horrible,
Well, I'll say two things. First, I'll say two sort of unrelated but related things. I think I really applaud and admire the way Wolfgang has honored his dad's legacy, the way he's fought for him, the way he's fought for his dad's legacy online. I think, it's really a lot of admiration. And Valerie too. I think the whole camp, the way everyone has spoken about him since he's passed, I think has been really heartrending. It's been beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know shit. I was not there. I don't know shit, so I'm not going to talk shit about something I know nothing about. But I know that's the press portrayal has been that that the drinking and drugs got out of control for Eddie, and and it was people who were going to the concerts were saying like, yeah, he was between songs, he was going offside the stage and throwing up and coming back out. And that's not to pick on Eddie Van Halen. Like that's a big part of why S.L.A.M exists. Lots of musicians are exposed to this and struggle with it. So I'm glad that he was, he spoke about being in a good place in his final years, and I'm glad he had love with his family. So this isn't a question for you, Steve. This is me. This is me just talking. But I certainly hope that he was in a decent place with everyone. And I'll round this out just by saying, fuck cancer. But I mean, I will ask, what was your emotions during that time? When you heard about, where Eddie was, near the end, what was your emotional reaction?
It's really weird, and it's just one little sort of dark anecdotal moment in the book towards the end, and it was one of the last conversations I had with him, and it was a phone conversation. Again, I hadn't seen him for a while, and we're talking, and I forget what we're talking about, but he says, yeah, cancer begins at home. And I thought he was saying that as, yeah, man, if bad things, if bad things are going to happen, bad things start at home, not specifically cancer. He just used, I thought he was just using the word cancer to describe, yeah, man, if you're having trouble at work or, this and that, it probably starts at home. The cancer starts at home. And that's what I thought. That's what I thought he was saying. I did not realize in 2003 that he had been diagnosed for several years. It never came up. So yeah, those years go by, and again, 6 weeks after I don't laugh at because it's just so horrible. I heard, in fact, somebody had emailed me, said, "Hey man, did you hear about Edward Van Halen? He passed away." And it's funny. My first response wasn't like, "Oh my God," and it didn't like hit me. But then it hit me, and it was like, "Oh my God," and then by then obviously it was all over online, by this cancer, And again, I write about this over and over in the book, and I think I may have even said it. And again, without trying to be glib or anything, I knew that early on the cigarettes were going to kill him. They're going to kill him before the coke or the alcohol did. Yeah, and that's sadly what happened. He was able to he gave up smoking to a point. He kept vaping, but drinking and drugs, he was able to let go of that. But could really never stop smoking. And so I hear about that. I'm 6 weeks into the book, and then I'm thinking, oh my God, what? I'm not trying to sound selfish here, and I will answer your question. But what do I do now? Do I keep writing the book? People are going to think, oh man, yeah, now you're going to write it for sure. Edward passes away, and you're going to just write a book and cash in on that. And the thought of that made me sick to my stomach. I thought if anybody thought that, I go, oh my God, there's nothing in the world worth that bad karma on my conscience. But yeah, it honestly hit me a little while later. I mean, I think it took a while. When I say a while, maybe a couple of weeks, and I realized, oh my God, yeah, he's gone. And as I'm writing the book, and I'm listening to all of our interviews and our conversations, and these very personal conversations that I called the Twilight tapes in the book, brought me back to those moments and some of these incredibly beautiful, joyous moments, and oh man, just hanging out, and he's playing guitars, I'm playing guitar with him. It was just amazing, and that's kind of when it hit me. And then anytime I hear a song on the radio, it was almost impossible to listen to. It was horrible, I mean, it was really horrible. Here was a guy who should have been around for at least another 20 years. And God, yeah, fuck cancer, fuck cigarettes. They are, I'll tell you, I think it's a worse addiction, and you certainly would know more than me. I'll bet more people get off heroin and cocaine and alcohol than they do smoke cigarettes. I'd love to see those numbers. So yeah, cigarettes. Don't start smoking, kids. Not good, And every time we ever saw Edward, every single photo, right? He had a cigarette. He had the cigarette up in his guitar strings, and it looked cool. And he always looked cool when he was smoking, And he was an amazing looking guy, and he never looked sick or overweight, or didn't ever have any of that bloat from drinking. He was always, such an amazing looking guy to look at. And it's true, man. Every moment I was with him, he had a cigarette. And it'd be burned halfway down, and he'd put it out, and he'd smoke another one. It was terrible, but yeah, it's one of those horrible tragedies. And we all postulate, well, what kind of music would he have been making? And Edward was learning, or maybe he had been for a while. He picked up cello. And you think, my God, can you imagine him doing some cello stuff? And jacking it up, putting a pickup on there, and now we're getting cello and things, fuzzed out. I mean, there's so much more he could have done. I think he could have gotten into like a soundtrack stuff. I mean, it would have been amazing at that kind of thing. So anyway, yeah, man, it's just horrible tragedy, terrible.
Yeah, no, yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. And then, so one more thing on the book for sure. And if you got time, I have a couple other questions about some other giants that you've met in your life. If you have a couple minutes, but yeah, you just talked about it. But one of my notes even I want to touch on is I really love my favorite parts of the book are where you're just describing just hanging out, and he'll be like, hey, what do you think of this? And it's gonna a future Van Halen masterpiece. Like, oh, check out this riff. I mean, talk to us about a little bit of the magic of those moments of just kind of hanging out in Eddie's room while he's jamming away at stuff, and the magic even without a guitar. And I know you said he's basically always had a guitar in hand, but talk about just the magic of those moments.
Those are some amazing moments, I'd be talking to him. I remember asking him, well, the first time we met, I mean, people say, oh, he was such a humble guy and this and that, yeah, but I don't think they really understand the depth of his humility. Look, he was one of these people, and I sensed it early on. He knew who he was. I mean, he really understood who he was. He understood that he was a very, very good guitar player. But he would never say that to you. He would never say, yeah, man, that solo I did on the last record, man, I blew everybody away. Or that guy, he never ever talked like that. The way he talked was, the first time we met at the whiskey, I knew that the band had gotten a huge deal on Warner Brothers, and I thought, my God, that's just amazing. I was in a band. I had little bands. I mean, nothing like Van Halen, obviously, And I'm thinking, my God, this guy has a deal on Warner. It's like it couldn't get any greater than that. So I remember asking him, I go, "Hey, man, you got the deal on Warner's. That must be amazing." And I remember him saying, "He goes, yeah, man, yeah, I think because they started working on the record. I don't know if the record was done by July '77, but I know they had started on the record. Van Halen nuts out there would know that better than me. But I said, man, yeah, God, a deal on Warner Brothers, that must be amazing. He goes, yeah, I think we made a good record. Hopefully people like it. I mean, that's how we talk. I'll tell you, man, if I had a deal on Warner Brothers in my band, I'd go, yeah, we fucking got a deal on Warner Brothers. The best amazing album you've ever heard. But yeah, there were just so many moments like that where yeah, he'd talk about the records almost as if it was as if somebody else had played the solos or the parts, or that he hadn't written them. He could sort of talk about them so honestly. And it's like, God, how do you maintain that in the face of the whole world telling you you're the greatest guitar player who's ever lived, and these other things, and that's what I loved about him. Look, for 1 second, I never forgot who was sitting there on the couch with me. I mean, I was aware of it every second, but he never made me aware of it. In other words, he would never say things that go like, oh shit, I better not. It was never like that. I could have said anything to him, which he may, just like you would with any friend, which he may or may not have liked to have heard, didn't care, there were just so many of those moments, there's a couple of times again when he comes up to the house and he plays me the rough tracks of records that aren't out yet. For the second and third records, he did that, And we go down to his car or a boombox and we're listening to these unmixed tracks. I think it's just guitar, maybe, and drums. I know there's no vocals. Maybe there's not even bass. And then we go back up to the house, my little guest house on Weepaw Way. And, he picks up one of my guitars and he's playing all that stuff acoustically on one of my electrics. And he's playing these songs that I've just heard. And that was like, oh my God. It's one thing hearing the tracks and, he's going through his rig and he's got his thing going, but it's entirely different thing, him sitting on with one of my guitars and playing it acoustically. And it's just Edward Van Halen, and he's kind of talking about the songs. He goes, yeah, and originally this song had these other parts and he's playing these other parts. And he's like, what's the word? I mean, it's almost like he's proud of what he's done, but it's not like he's bragging about it. He's like jubilant that he's created this, and he wants to share that. And that's an amazing kind of a characteristic to have, especially for him, right? Because after the first record comes out, my God, they go from, being this band that's playing the whiskey, to opening for Journey, blowing Journey off, opening for Black Sabbath, blowing Sabbath off. By the second tour, they're headlining, and the whole world has now embraced, him and the band. So it's pretty amazing. And I will tell you that those first two albums and the first two tours is when he was happiest in my mind. I saw it because everything was new to him, and everything was an adventure and an exploration. He was just a remarkable guy. Last thing I'll say about it, for Edward, it was all about respect. And you talked earlier about, the turmoil within the band. That didn't come because he didn't think that Michael Anthony wasn't a good bass player or that Dave wasn't a good singer. It had nothing to do with that. It had to do with the fact that he felt that they were disrespecting him by not bringing enough to the band. He wanted them to bring as much as he brought to the band, which is basically working 24 hours a day. I mean, that's all he ever did. So no one was going to be able to do that. But he just wanted more from them. And I think that's that's kind of where those riffs kind of grew. Maybe as time went on, now there's more success and there's more money, and he wants more from them, and he's feeling like he's not getting it. Those are my feelings anyway. But at the same time, he loved those guys. I mean, he really loved Dave and Mike. He really did. So complex
Well,
guy,
I think that's something I learned from reading Tonechaser, and I think you convey that well. Now, I mean, you might be full of shit, Steve. I don't know, but
Yeah.
but I think I really, I'd never known that he was that much of a workaholic. Although, of course, he was to achieve that level of mastery, not just as a player, but as a songwriter and performer. But yeah, I learned that from your book about that kind of strife. But yeah, it's great. I don't know what else to say. It's incredible that you got those inside glimpses, and you got to have that cherished friendship that you had. It's really it's a once in a lifetime kind of thing. It's incredible.
Well, thank you, man. And I think about destiny. And I'm not trying to be crystal sniffer here, but destiny or synchronicity. Um, you know, what happens if I'm not there at the whiskey that night and I'm not introduced to him? I honestly believe what would have happened is somewhere along the way I would have interviewed him. They were on Warner's. I was on Warner's press list, so I was interviewing all the Warner's bands. So at some point in time I would have interviewed him, but could have been an entirely different situation, meeting him for the first time as a journalist and a musician. But look, man, I don't discount luck at all. I sometimes say, yeah, man, I think I'd rather be lucky than good. I mean, it was amazing, and I was fortunate, to have known him all those years and to have had those memories. And you know, I hope I was able to share them honestly and openly with people who read Tonechaser. And yeah, if I did that, then I feel like I sort of paid my dues. In other words, I was given this opportunity, and hey, you were there, you saw this. We, and when I say we, whoever the we is out there, think you should write about it and share it. So hopefully I've done that.
All right. Yeah.
To the best
Well.
of my
Yeah.
ability, anyway. So
All right. Well, actually, you set it up my next question pretty well. I've got two more. They're going to be big questions, just so everybody's warned. So it's not going to be like favorite color. But
okay.
the next one's going to be a big one. So let's talk about actually how you came to that point, and then your career in journalism. Because there were times you were in the book, you're just kind of a name would pop out, and I would just fall off my seat. You're talking about like Tony Iommi, Brian May, Alex Lifeson. You photographed Jimi Hendrix, for fuck's sake.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
so talk to everyone about that world that you existed in, and some of these incredible, guitar heroes, music heroes that you've kind of rubbed elbows with. And I know you say some things about Richie Blackmore in the book, but yeah, I mean, we don't have to go like with bad stories. Talk to us about some of
No,
these
no.
incredible people that you've encountered.
Yeah, and that was another fortuitous moment for me. In that I sort of began writing, and I can never kind of pinpoint it. Either it was kind of maybe late 72 or early 73. And in the 70s, all of these music magazines were being born. I think the Guitar Player's first issue is 69 or 70. Um, Guitar World was after that. So there was all these magazines coming into fruition, and they all needed writers. The staff couldn't handle it. So I was just in the right place at the right time. One, I was out here in California, right? And every band in the world is going to tour, come through L.A., and I was living up in Laurel Canyon, which is the Hollywood Hills. So every band, is going to play at the Whiskey and the Troubadour and those kinds of things. And I was there, and I just met some people who really opened some doors for me. Um, I became a correspondent. I became like the West Coast correspondent for an English newspaper called Sounds, and that was incredible. And so now I'm the correspondent for Sounds, and it's like I can approach labels, say, "Hey, I'm a correspondent, and Sounds wants an interview with Peter Frampton or Black Kangaroo or Steely Dan," and it's like, sure. I mean, back then it was a real community amongst record publicists and management and journalists and magazines. It's like everybody fed each other. It's like, the record label wanted interviews with their bands, so they would reach out to the journalists, and then the journalists would reach out to the magazines who needed the stories and needed coverage, and management was making everything available. And Loggins and Messina aren't coming to L.A., but we'll fly you out to Idaho. You want to go? Yeah, I'll go to Idaho to interview Loggins and Messina. And yeah, I'll go to fly to Canada and interview Randy Bachman for guitar player. It was just amazing. And again, at that point in time, all these bands that we now look back as these classic rock or these bands and guitar players that we love, a lot of them were just coming out with their first records then. So, I met Billy Gibbons. I think they were on their third record, and I think that's LaGrange. And they were, they were ascending the mountain, but it's not like they wouldn't become who they became. And it's like, yeah. So I sit down with the entire band, and we sort of, you meet a band when they're really on the rise, and they kind of really appreciate the coverage. And so kind of this bond is formed. So the next time I interview Billy, it's kind of like, hey, Steve, I remember you, and it was amazing. Aerosmith, I interviewed the entire band. They played the Whiskey the night before. Aerosmith at the Whiskey, and this is like the second record hadn't even come out yet, and the first record did okay, right? Dream On, but it's not like they were going to become who they became, and that happened with so many of these artists. And I try to think of all those artists I interviewed, and it was just about everybody. And again, I talk about the one that I never interviewed was Clapton, who I always wanted to interview. But Page and Beck and Blackmore. And Blackmore was amazing, and I know I kind of say those things about him, and I write about him in the book. That's just who Ritchie Blackmore was. That doesn't take away 1 ounce of who he was as a guitar player and songwriter. So Ritchie Blackmore, I've read about the famous encounter between Edward and Ritchie in the book, and I've talked about Ritchie, being a tough individual to handle, but that does not take away 1 iota from who he was and is as a guitar player. Those Purple records, In Rock, Machine Head, Fireball, and Burn. To my mind, are 4 of the greatest freaking guitar hard rock records ever made. I think that Deep Purple set the stage for all of those bands to follow. And I was lucky, man. Yeah, to meet Ritchie and so many. Meeting these people, it's funny. I said I was hyper aware of sitting there with Edward Van Halen all the time. Look, man, when I walk into a room and it's Joe Perry or it's Gary Moore or Frampton or Stevie Winwood or Brian Wilson or David Gilmour, I'm trying to look at my picture, Paul Kossoff, Felix Pappalardi, Mick Ronson, 38 Special, Les Paul, Leo Fender, Michael Schenker, Rick Derringer, Justin Hayward, Todd Rundgren, Dweezil. I mean, not for a second do I forget who I'm sitting with, Over the years, and I'm doing so many countless interviews, you try to be professional. I'm there working a gig. I can't even call it working. I mean, but magazine is expecting a story and you got to cover these certain bases, um, uh, but I was in awe and still am. I think musicians are the most creative people on the planet, and to have met these people, uh, and then to write about them, it was sort of a dream come true, and again, without sounding corny, and I did for a lot of years. I would have done all this stuff for free. Hey man, you got to go interview Peter Frampton, but we're not going to pay you. Great, you know what I'm saying? It was just, I was lucky, and I never lost sight of that for a second. And I'll tell you, I've seen a lot of journalists who have been writing for years, and I saw how blasé they got. I thought, you fuckers, do you know how lucky you are sitting in that room with Steve Morse? That's just me, you know. Anyway,
No,
yeah, it,
perfectly.
it was an amazing time, coming up in the 70s as a music journalist. Uh, Incredible.
Yeah, that it's just incredible. No, and there's no way I can compare. I was born in the '70s, so there's no way I can compare. The music journalism in this century to that. But and that the list of names you just rattled off, my head is still spinning. It's like David Gilmour, Jeff Beck. Like it's just incredible. And Blackmore, as we said, as we said earlier. I don't know if we lost it in the technical difficulty, but 2025, our best is going out to the Blackmore camp. I know that Richie Blackmore just had a heart attack, I believe his wife said in an interview. So all the best to him. So now, I want to take it out, and I do want to show off my Lemmy, just to because I love this thing. I just had to show it off for a second. I want to ask about having been backstage. The '70s and '80s, of course, were the height of the debauchery. It's still out there, and poor choices, so to speak, or at least destructive choices. I know you've probably seen a lot. You've seen a lot of people like heartbreak. What I'm getting at, I'm sorry, let me get to my point.
Yeah, yeah.
What's your advice to musicians to avoid the pitfalls that you have seen, that you've witnessed firsthand, and that you've seen musicians kind of that have taken the end of their lives too soon, or really destroyed the quality of their lives and their relationships? Drugs, alcohol, suicide, self-destruction. What's your advice for people to navigate that in the music world?
I think with a musician, I think a lot of times, well, I would venture to say every time, until you find some success, it's a world of everybody saying no. Yeah, send us one more demo. Go play one more shitty club. There's no answer. There's no way to get there easily. And so I think by the time they get there, um, uh, you know, and they get success and there's people around them, I think that becomes such a heady thing. And I think that if maybe you weren't the most grounded person to begin with, but now you're in a position where, yes, you have all of this stuff available to you. And maybe you had an addictive personality back in the day, but maybe you couldn't afford to go out and buy drugs. I mean, I don't know. I think that could be part of it, because it's only after a band becomes successful or they get signed that you hear about these people having drug problems. Now, do they have drugs problems before they get in the band? I mean, it's possible, but I think it's certainly exacerbated after they get into the band. I think the idea of fame is so addictive, and that maybe sometimes these guys think, well, I'll do anything to achieve that. Maybe they see their heroes getting high and they think that's part of it, And Edward would say over and over, man, I've never played sober, and he was terrified to do it. Could he have done it? Yeah, absolutely. Could these guys have created without the drugs? I certainly think so. Did they think so? They didn't. And so that becomes part of the process. I don't think it's necessarily self-destructive. I don't think that they set out to damage themselves. I don't.
Sure.
Look. Some of them do. Obviously, those who take their own lives, and that to me is what's so hard to understand about that is, these guys who have taken their lives. I mean, in suicide. I'm not talking about in what are described as accidental suicides, and even those, who knows, how accidental they were. But I mean, the people who come to mind are people like, oh, I'm sorry, man, Chris Cornell, or it's like, you look from the outside and you think, my God, this person has everything. I mean, he's an amazing looking guy. He's one of the greatest singers ever. He's in successful bands. He's got money. I'm sure he's got an amazing house and cars and his girlfriend or his wife. What was it that made him so unhappy and depressed that he would have done that? God, that question I can't answer. Only those people really close to him. And I have seen it. I've seen it up close. Guys getting so fucked up and drinking so much that they can't stand up, or doing so much coke that it's like they're, they don't know who they are or where they are. It's a terrible thing. It's obviously a terrible thing. I do want to say, look, is addiction and suicide like that more rampant amongst musicians, or visible musicians we know, as opposed to athletes or actors and actresses or bank tellers or postmen? I don't know. The thing is, you'll never know about the bank teller or the mailman or those kinds of people. I mean, certainly it happens amongst actors and actresses, and their problems. I don't know, man. You would think that, people would look at people like Edward Van Halen and go, my God, we thought he was a god, and look what cigarettes did to him. I'm never going to smoke again, or does it come out the other end? Oh my God, he was so cool when he smoked, I'm going to smoke. I don't know. It's terrible. It's a horrible thing. I mean, I think the other addiction that people don't talk about as much is food addiction. I think an addiction to food, people who are overweight, my God, that is a nightmare. Wow. I think that's terrible. We don't really think of rock and roll people as having those problems. Some do, but it's more the drug thing. So I don't know, man. I think what you're doing is great with your organization, and trying to address it. Even accidental suicides. It's like, I'm sorry, accidental overdoses. I mean, come on, man. Why are you mixing that many drugs anyway? How, there seems to be some universal component that makes all of these people do that. And I know that's a weird thing to say, that's all, 27 is that deadly age. They've all passed away at 27, right? Janis Joplin and Brian Jones and Jim Morrison and, 100 others. 27? My God, so young. You're so unhappy at such an early age. I don't know. And then part of me thinks, and I don't know how much I believe in it, well, you have this gift, you're this artist, and you've had this success. Well, somebody up there is going to say, we're going to balance this out, and you're going to have this other side as well, this addictive side, and it's up to you to be able to balance that. I don't know, man. I don't know.
Well, I definitely sprung the question on you, so I appreciate, you really searching for the answer there, and kind of trying to understand it, because it's not the kind of thing where I think there's anyone who says, well, I can explain it to you in 3 words. So I appreciate you kind of, walking us through the thought process on it. It is a scourge in the music world and the entertainment world for sure. I mean, the study just came out that we've talked about at S.L.A.M. That the numbers are. They really are stating that it's an at-risk profession because the numbers are that bad in this world. So that's a lot of why Support Life in Music is here. So I appreciate the kind words on that. And I appreciate, all of your insights on this stuff. And yeah, so I also appreciate all the time. We talked a lot longer than we had planned, I think, but thank you, Stephen. As I said, Tonechaser is the book. It's chronicling Stephen's relationship with Eddie Van Halen. It's because a really behind the scenes look at Eddie and Van Halen and the family. And as I said, Stephen's career, that's got to be your next book. Like it should be called like, holy shit, I'm hanging out with David Gilmour or something, something like that. But yeah, so thank you, Stephen Rosen. It's been great talking to you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Jack. I really appreciate your interest and support for the book. It means a lot. Had a lot of fun being here, man.